This 75-inch Samsung QN900A Neo QLED TV is equipped with 1920 local dimming zones, the highest we've counted on a consumer full-array local dimming LED LCD TV so far. But how's the picture quality? Keep watching to find out in this review. The Samsung Q900A uses a VA-type LCD panel with true RGB subpixel structure. Now, because local dimming cannot be switched off from the picture menu, we had to use our own custom-ordered test pattern to measure the native contrast of the display. We measured a black level of 0.07 candelas per square meter after aligning peak white to 120 candelas per square meter, giving us a native contrast ratio of 1700 to 1. Now, this is lower than what we typically measure from VA-type LCD panels. And the reasons are because, first of all, 8K LCD panel has a lower light transmittance due to the higher density of the pixels and also the transistors behind the panel. And secondly, this Samsung QN900A also has a wide viewing angle filter applied, and therefore its contrast ratio is a bit lower than what we would see from even Samsung's own 4K LED LCD televisions. But if we measure the ANSI contrast using this 4x4 ANSI checkerboard pattern, black level would drop to close to 0 because the Samsung QN900A has a very high number of local dimming zones. In fact, when we used our own custom-ordered test pattern containing a small white box crawling horizontally and then vertically against the borders of her black background, we counted 60 vertical columns and 32 horizontal rows, giving us a total of 1920 local dimming zones, which is the highest we have counted on any consumer full-array local dimming LED LCD TV so far. Now, when it came to the local dimming algorithm, the one implemented on the Samsung QN900A is miles better than what we saw on last year's Q950TS. In this scene from Gravity, where Sandra Bullock is hurtling through space, the backlight remained fairly stable with only some minor fluctuations around the corners. And if we look at this campfire scene from The Revenant, this is in HDR, you can see that although some shadow detail are slightly crushed, the blooming is extremely well controlled, courtesy of the high number of local dimming zones and how the Samsung QN900A went about controlling the light leakage into surrounding zones. Next, we put up this scene from Batman vs Superman, and again, I am very impressed with what the Samsung QN900A did, because it is capable of very high peak brightness, which reduced the visibility of blooming somewhat. But even if I paid attention to the top and bottom letterbox bars, I didn't really see much seepage of the adjacent lights from the content area. When we put up this ABL automatic brightness limiter test pattern, the algorithm on the Samsung QN900A would suppress the brightness when the circle is small to keep blooming at bay, and then it will grow brighter, and maybe at certain intervals there will be a sudden jump in brightness due to how presumably the TV is trying to detect test patterns to boost the brightness. Next, let's check out the colors. At the time I filmed this video in August 2021, the Kalman integration still isn't ready yet, so with the calibrations I had to do all of them manually. And also, as a result of the very high number of local dimming zones, it is impossible to implement a color accurate 3D LUT for each backlight intensity. So from that point of view, it is understandable that colors will never be as accurate as self-emissive displays. Still, after calibration, colors, including skin tones, still looked fairly natural in real-world content. Note that just like on previous Samsung televisions, Samsung's color mapping in HDR mode would introduce some posterization around very bright HDR elements, requiring us to change color space to native to reduce the posterization. But unfortunately, this will also make the colors less accurate. Color Space Custom will use Color Space Auto as its base, which will reintroduce the posterization. So if you are sensitive to such posterization in HDR content, I would suggest that you go with native, even though the colors may be less accurate. Next, motion. Even with picture clarity disabled, the Samsung QN900A correctly performed 5.5 pull-down to present 24 frames per second films smoothly without any sign of telesonic judder. For higher frame rate material, motion resolution came in at the sample and hold baseline of 300 lines. Engaging picture clarity would increase motion resolution to 1080 lines or even higher. And under the picture clarity custom submenu, you can adjust the blur reduction and judder reduction independently. There is also an LED clear motion setting which would activate black frame insertion, but we saw too much flicker, especially in brighter parts on screen, so we would be inclined to turn it off to reduce eye fatigue. Also, engaging LED clear motion for 50 Hz content would force judder reduction to be switched on at all times, leading to noticeable interpolation artifacts and soap opera effect. Talking of which, with 50 Hz broadcast material, engaging even blur reduction would cause some soap opera effect, so discerning viewers might want to turn picture clarity off altogether when watching broadcast content in pale regions. When upscaling standard definition content, unfortunately, just like other Samsung televisions, overscan cannot be switched off, so the picture would be zoomed in slightly, causing some softness to the image. And because there is a general lack of native 8K content, Samsung has pushed the upscaling on the QN900A to be a bit more aggressive, leading to some fizziness on this SMPT RP133 test card, which translated to exaggerated appearance of compression artifacts in real-world content such as this grubby broadcast from ITV3 in standard definition. To be fair, buyers of such expensive 8K televisions are unlikely to be watching much standard definition content, and fortunately the QN900A did very well with high definition or HD content with a clean image and good jaggies suppression, as you can see from this HQV benchmark test pattern where the jagged edges were suppressed adequately not only on the bars but also on the circle. However, please bear in mind that in certain shots that contain lots of fine details, such as this one from Skyfall, the aggressive upscaling on the Samsung QN900A can cause the picture to look a bit more processed and less natural than even Samsung's own 4K TVs. As far as film mode deinterlacing is concerned, the Samsung QN900A correctly detected and processed 3:2 cadence in standard definition for 80i but not in high definition 1080i. Furthermore, the TV also lost lock occasionally when dealing with 2:2 cadence, so we would advise viewers to always try and send a progressive video signal to the QN900A for the best results. Screen uniformity was good by LED LCD standards on our QN900A review sample, with minimal dirty screen effect, bending or color tinting on full-field gray slides, which is a massive improvement over the DSE and FALD grid effect we saw on last year's Q950TS. This coverage is sponsored by Richard Sounds Manchester. Call 0333 900 0086 for the best prices and expert advice for TVs, AV, and Hi-Fi. For HDR, peak brightness measured 1600 nits on a 10% window after calibration to D65 white point and 450 nits full field. DCI-P3 color gamut coverage came in at 95% UV, while Red 2020 was 73%, underpinned by a spectral power distribution which revealed beautifully distinct red, green, and blue waveforms courtesy of quantum dot technology. As you can expect from an LED LCD without as much ABL restriction as OLED televisions, the Samsung QN900A presented bright HDR scenes with plenty of impact, although in some ways this is artificially boosted by the always-on dynamic tone mapping that has been implemented by Samsung to make HDR images brighter than reference. We had to change local dimming from the default setting of standard to high to mitigate the over-brightening, and even then we still had to go into the ST2084 EOTF and change it to -2 to approximate a correct looking APL in certain scenes. Native 10-bit gradation was better than LG OLEDs, but not as good as Sony televisions. Engaging noise reduction did not do much in reducing the posterization because it is not a dedicated decontouring filter. Because of its natively high peak brightness and also Samsung's tone mapping philosophy, the QN900A would preserve specular highlight detail even up to 4000 nits in a better fashion than most other televisions. With game mode engaged, input lag measured 11 milliseconds at 60 frames per second, dropping to 8 milliseconds at 120 frames per second. One thing that is unique on Samsung TVs is the Game Motion Plus setting, which allows users to engage motion interpolation without introducing too much input lag. We measured the lag times to be around 24 milliseconds, but some people may prefer using this to provide a smoother experience when playing 30 frames per second games, even though bear in mind that you will be introducing some interpolation artifacts. The Samsung QN900A is equipped with 4 HDMI 2.1 ports with a bandwidth of 40 gigabits per second, each supporting 4K 120Hz gaming, as you can see from the Xbox information screen. Although because obviously Samsung TVs don't support Dolby Vision, you can't actually play Dolby Vision games at all. The 8K Neo QLED TV also supports ALLM or auto low latency mode, which will automatically switch the TV into game mode when you start playing a game, as well as VRR or variable refresh rate, as you can see from the fluctuating frame rates on Samsung's very useful game bar. With VRR engaged, we saw some flickering inside game menus and during loading screens, but rarely in the actual gameplay sequence itself. You can see here in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 that there is noticeable posterization in the sky. Engaging Game HDR is meant to activate HGIG on the Samsung QN900A, but because dynamic tone mapping is still active even in HGIG mode, this would push users to go for an unrealistically high level before the sun would start clipping, causing actual HGIG gameplay to look really washed out with blown out highlights. I have done a previous video explaining how to set the HGIG parameters on your PS5 or Xbox Series X on Samsung televisions so that you can get a better looking HGIG HDR game picture with plenty of pop and depth as well as good retention of highlight detail. Overall, bright and colorful games such as Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart looked good on the Samsung QN900A due to the TV's high peak brightness and color volume. And of course, you don't need to worry about any static elements being burnt to the screen even after heavy gaming sessions. With this being an 8K TV, we had to test the 8K aspect of things. The QN900A resolved 8K resolution on this 8K horizontal grille pattern. However, we were concerned to see that there is an increase in non-uniformity, especially on the left side of the screen, as if Samsung's Mura compensation couldn't take effect in 8K mode. This was borne out in actual 8K content as well, where you can see the dirty screen effect and banding appearing on screen. Once we switched to 4K, the uniformity got better. My theory is that the Mura compensation can be applied in 4K mode but not in 8K mode. With PC mode engaged, the TV passed full 444 chroma with above average gradation in the Display HDR app. Note that for 8K resolution, all 4 HDMI 2.1 ports also support 24 gigabits per second of DSC or display stream compression. Just like last year's Q950TS, the design of the Samsung QN900A is absolutely stunning because of the bezel-less infinity screen design. Here's an anecdote to give you an idea of just how invisible the bezel on the Samsung QN900A is. Before I start filming footages for a particular TV review, I normally zoom in my camera slowly, eventually lining up the borders of the camera frame to the bezel of the television, so that I can have some leeway to rotate or crop the shot in post. But with the Samsung QN900A, there's literally no bezel at all, so I had to zoom right to the edge of the picture on the television and then zoom back out a bit. It's utterly surreal how Samsung has managed to engineer this infinity screen design. One feature that's exclusive to Samsung's 2021 8K TVs, including the flagship QN900A, is the ability to attach the One Connect box to the stand, which should please those of you who like connecting from behind. The company was even considerate enough to include a shorter One Connect cable to reduce dangly bits. The anti-glare coating on the Samsung QN900A muted reflections quite effectively, but could introduce some rainbow reflections depending on how light hits the screen. And in conjunction with the very high light output of the television, we think that the QN900A, just like all Samsung high-end Neo QLED televisions, remain one of the best TVs you can buy for installation in a bright room. Let's sum up. The Samsung QN900A is a significant improvement over last year's Q950TS, featuring a more stable local dimming algorithm with less artifacts, cleaner screen uniformity possibly thanks to mini LED backlighting, as well as better 50Hz motion handling. The number of HDMI 2.1 inputs has also increased from 1 port to 4 ports in total, and the bezel-less infinity screen design remains as stunning as ever. So the Samsung QN900A receives our recommended award. However, I think Samsung's 4K flagship Neo QLED QN95A is still the smarter purchase for a few reasons. 1. The native contrast of the 4K Neo QLED is higher, contributing to slightly deeper blacks in low APL scenes despite a lower number of local dimming zones. 2. The 4K Neo QLED is capable of higher full-screen brightness, which is evident in certain HDR scenes and demo clips containing lots of white, such as this Horses in Snow sequence from the Spears & Mansell UHD HDR benchmark disc. And perhaps more importantly, the 4K Neo QLED is going to be cheaper than the 8K Neo QLED, of course. The way I see it, the most compelling reason to buy the Samsung QN900A is if you are based in a region where the QN95A is not available, for example in the USA, and you need the 4 HDMI 2.1 ports on the QN900A to hook up your PS5, Xbox Series X, and a high-end PC. Or, for some reason, the flagship 4K Neo QLED model in your country is using an ADS LCD panel, and buying the QN900A is the only way to guarantee getting a VA-type LCD panel. To watch some of our comparison videos involving Samsung's Neo QLED TVs, please click here for our playlist, and I'll see you in the next video.